for having me. So I run a company called Lightci. We started off as a consulting shop and then slowly grew into a recruiting firm. And now we're kind of back in the consulting space, somewhere in between recruiting, consulting, product studio. It's a pretty broad spectrum, and we're trying to figure out where our place is along that line. But at a high level, we build products, we build teams, and we basically build outcomes, whether that is in the shape of high performing engineering teams, high performing products, very nice looking designs, whatever it might be across that spectrum.
Yeah, got it. What are some of the clients that you work with?
Google, Apple, Coinbase, Walmart, a couple of the big airlines, some of the big banks, and growing every day.
All right. Well, one of the things that is one of the biggest topics out there right now is artificial intelligence, AI. Where do you see the future of AI? Let's just dive right into AI and how it affects software engineering. And then we'll probably talk about climate technology because you have some experience in that area.
Yeah, so AI is super interesting because over the last, 3-4 years, there's been a huge paradigm shift into what AI means for software engineers. At first, I think the thought was always, hey, AI is going to replace engineers. They're going to be out of work. AI is going to do everyone's job for them. But increasingly, it's looking like it's becoming a supplement, if not a tool, right? So when engineers are writing code now, instead of racking their heads, going on Stack Overflow, making Google searches when there's a bug, they might turn to ChatGPT just as an example, right? Ask it a question and say, hey, like, this is the problem I'm having. How do I go about solving it? Almost like a virtual thought partner, if you will, right? And the evolution is quite interesting because it's been accelerated by 1,000% over the last 4 or 5 quarters, right? As soon as ChatGPT came out, it became publicly accessible. And that's something that's never been there before, right? ML and AI was always sort of limited to the research community or, kids who wanted to get ahead of their work at school and wanted to do some side projects. Now it's you make an account online and you start talking with this virtual AI assistant almost. It's super cool. So the progression is changed, and it's less for academics and just pure academia and more for the general public and almost like an assist in terms of doing your job. And it's not limited to just software engineers, and it'll change over time as well and probably become more and more accessible over the next couple of quarters, I think.
Yeah. You have some experience in climate change technology. I'd like you to just describe your background in that. I know you've worked for a couple of different companies, I guess in Silicon Valley, is that right? Related to climate technology?
Yeah. So I was the head of engineering at EcoCart, which built a climate offset plugin for e-commerce. So the idea was, if you go online and let's say you buy a pair of shoes, as the consumer, you want to know, hey, the shoes are coming from, let's say, India. They're made of polyester 30%. They're made of cotton 70%. All of that together being shipped from India all the way to your house outputs 65 kilograms of carbon. Now that you know that, what action can you actually take to either, diminish the impact of that carbon or offset it completely? And what we landed on was we're going to slap a checkbox inside the checkout page and say, hey, add an extra $1.30. We'll buy carbon offsets on your behalf so that it becomes a carbon neutral order. So I did that at EcoCart for about 1.5 years. Then I switched over to a company called Cloverly, which does something similar, except it's very API driven. So, Amex was one of their biggest clients, offsetting carbon for their cardholders. They also had an e-commerce plugin. After that, I jumped and started this consulting firm and built similar things for a bunch of other companies in the space. So a lot of the e-commerce plugins that you'll see in climate tech, I'm sure I've touched in some way or another.
Yeah. Artificial intelligence, AI, what role does that have to play in climate change and climate technology in the next several years here? And how is it going to help us save our planet?
Well, climate tech, like as an industry in itself, is tricky, right? Because at its core, all of climate tech, health tech, the underpinnings of all of this is making money, right? So naturally, you have almost like conflicting obligations when it comes to that, right? You want to make money, but you also want to save the planet. But at the same time, you want to make sure consumers buy into your product. And unfortunately, I think what people have realized is you can't just go to someone and say, hey, give me money, I'm going to save the planet. It's not as simple as that, right? So AI aside for a second, I think what it comes down to is, how do you influence consumer behavior in a way that's positive while still driving business results? And I don't think anyone has really figured out the answer to that question, right? Carbon offsets as a whole is very tricky to explain to consumers, right? I think a lot of people probably even watching this might not even know what carbon offsets mean. And when you're dealing with e-commerce where you have the consumer's attention span for sub 45 seconds, you can't give them an essay, right? You got to make it digestible. You can say, hey, we're planting trees or whatever, but what does that really mean either, right? So how do we save the planet? That's a very complex question that I don't think anyone has fully figured out the answer to with tech, at least not consumer facing tech. There's some cool companies out there that are doing like carbon sequestration and stuff, and that's making a genuine impact and doesn't require consumer buy-in. But the second you step into, I want to make money from consumers and at the same time drive, impact in my community, like it becomes ultimately more tricky. Does that make sense?
Yeah. They're just sort of at cross ends, making money and saving the planet. Got it. It's difficult.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's okay. No, fair enough on that. As far as AI goes, in general, you had an interesting thing that you said earlier when you mentioned that over the last 4 or 5 quarters, the speed of it or the complexity of it has increased by 1,000%, something along those lines. Is that sort of parabolic growth trajectory still set to continue? And in that case, what are practical uses of machine learning and AI sort of in the real world going to look like in the tough question, but in the next like 2, 3, 4, 5 years, what are some things that you can envision happening?
Yeah, like I think what it comes down to is realizing that ML and AI it's the underpinnings of everything eventually, right? It's not just ML, it's not just AI, it's not just the product you're building. Everything is just so tightly intertwined that you start to see blurry lines. You can't tell the difference anymore, right? Even within climate tech, like with EcoCart, for example, part of the cool stuff was the ML algorithm behind calculating, what goes into the shoe and what that means in terms of carbon impact. As a consumer, you have no idea that's happening in the background, right? But over the next couple of quarters and probably the next couple of years, that'll just become more and more present, right? You won't realize AI or ML is doing anything in the background, but really it's powering a lot of the technology that you see as a consumer today. Even in credit card markets, for example, something as simple as detecting fraud, that's not a person sitting in a dark room going, hey, this is fraudulent, this is not. There's an algorithm for it, right? Whether it's ML or not, I don't fully know yet, but over time, that's definitely the shift it's going to take.
Yeah, got it. Okay, cool. Let's move on over to the subject of the nature of this podcast, or this, it's not a podcast, but this feature that we do for Grit Daily is from the ground up. It's about building companies. And one of the aspects of building a company or running a company is that you eventually may want to sell it, or something along those lines. You have some experience in that area working in Silicon Valley. Can you just describe your experience selling a company that you've worked with in the past? And I believe it was to Google, right? Go ahead and tell me what that process was like.
Yeah, it's a whirlwind. It's not simple. It's not linear. It's not straightforward. When you think things are working out, then all of a sudden they stop and then they get right back on track. It's an emotional and mental roller coaster alongside all of the financial stuff. I'm lucky because I'm an engineer, so I was almost siloed from a lot of that. But even with the company I'm running now, as we're exploring sale and all of that, it's very tricky, right? You get distracted from doing day-to-day operations and you're focused fully on almost getting rid of this baby that you built, right? And managing expectations on how other people feel about that as well, right? Imagine being employee number 2 at a company and all of a sudden you realize, hey, this company is shutting down because someone is buying it. How does that make you feel, right? Forget what the CEO feels or what the founders feel. You have to manage that across the company, and it's quite tricky. And then the other thing I've noticed is that more often than not, people won't come to you offering wads of cash as much as you'd like to romanticize it, right? No one's going to walk with a big bag of money that has a dollar sign on it and drop it on your door. There's a lot of work that goes into it, both from due diligence and actually finding buyers that are a good fit culturally, and from a financial perspective, making sure everyone benefits, not just you. It's taxing. It's not easy. It's a journey, I guess, is how I would put it.
Got it. Yeah. Any other maybe 1 or 2 more tips for the startup founder or entrepreneur who's considering selling right now, who's going through that whirlwind? What are 1 or 2 other things that you would tell them to keep in mind as far as the preparations for selling or the attempt at trying to find a buyer?
Yeah, and I think this applies to just running the company in general. You need to have a good, deep support bench. I realized pretty quickly that founders have almost like a complexity to them, right? They want to keep in the loop on anything and everything that's going on inside the company. They want to be the ones doling out advice and fixing problems. It's not sustainable, especially once you start marching towards sale. Most of your time is taken now, putting on suits, going to dinners, going to cocktail receptions, that kind of stuff. You need to have people you can lean on, you can support, that you can have as thought partners that are there to kind of guide you through what to do next. Because even just looking at me for an example, I'm pretty young. Like I don't have a lot of experience in selling a company. I've been lucky, which is great, but luck only takes you so far, right? What luck lets you do though is build a good team around you. So if you have, a great COO or a great CSO or whatever it might be, they're the ones who will take you across the finish line. You can't do it on your own. Forget the sale, even just running a successful company, you need to have good people around you. And I'm sure this is like the cheesiest line in the startup founder playbook or whatever, but it is important. And I will stress the point that we are where we are today because our bench is deep and the support system that we've built is really great.
Yeah. All right. So let's, as we move toward the end of the interview, let's talk about Lightci and on, your experience currently running it. What's it been like growing it? And it has grown quickly. Tell me how it's grown quickly, what that looks like, and also how you ensure optimal technical results for a diverse range of clients.
Yeah, it's been a pain in the ass growing it. No, I'm just kidding. It's been a ton of fun, but it's also been quite hectic, right? Like even just my role over time has changed quite a bit. I was an engineer before this, and I guess I still am an engineer, so not past tense, but I don't get to write code as much. I don't get to, sit in on client meetings as much. I'm out there like doing sales and doing BD, which is different than what I expected. We're also very lucky that we're bootstrapped, right? So we don't have VCs to answer to, we don't have investors to answer to. We've had offers for funding and we've just turned it down because we want to take it into our own hands, and I think that was one of the best choices we made early on. So to answer your question, scaling it has been really, really tough, in a good way though. We have lots of stuff going on. People are stretched thin as always, as you will be at startups. But like the growth we've seen is quite parabolic. We started this 18 months ago or so, and now we're at almost 150 people. So in terms of like hockey stick growth, I think we're in this trajectory right now, and we got to figure out how to stabilize it a little bit so people don't start getting burnt out, right? But it's been great. It's been a good journey, lots of learnings, lots of stress as well, as I'm sure is natural. But overall, it's been a good time.
All right, Zain Lakhani from Lightci. Appreciate having you on the show here today.
Likewise. Thanks so much, Sean.
You got it.